They stopped her for no reason other than irritation and boredom. They hurled vulgarities, a mixture of racism and sexism, expecting a fearful response. But she was not afraid. Her calm, almost icy demeanor only infuriated them. And so they did. Cold cuffs clamped around her wrists, turning her power suit into a symbol of false powerlessness. Shoved into the back seat of a police car, taken to a dark street corner, she heard them make a brazen blackmail offer. $3,000 to buy her freedom, to forget about this unjust arrest. They looked at her, a beautiful, well-dressed black woman, and saw only a potential victim, a vulnerable person who could be easily exploited. They had made a terrible mistake. They had not seen the sharp eyes that silently assessed the situation. They had not deciphered her uncanny calm, and they had not imagined the true power that lay beneath that facade, power that called for intervention from places they had never dreamed of. Listen in to witness the dramatic reversal of fortunes as the prey in the black suit is revealed to be a much more fearsome predator, and the two corrupt cops realize they have just signed the death sentence of their own careers. Dusk was settling over the bustling city of Chicago. The weak orange light of the last day struggled to filter through the glass and steel skyscrapers of the Loop, casting long, dappled streaks of light across the wide, gray granite sidewalks. The rush hour had passed, and the hustle and bustle had thinned out, leaving a relative quiet, save for the whistling wind through the alleys and the distant echoes of fire trucks and police sirens. The streetlights were starting to come on, casting a pale yellow artificial glow onto the pavement, signaling the start of another evening in the windy city. In the midst of that somewhat lonely and mystical scene, a lone figure was walking briskly and decisively on the sidewalk of LaSalle Street. It was Victoria Adams. At 38, she possessed a cold, sharp, and mysterious beauty. Her velvety, dark brown skin contrasted with the perfectly tailored black suit, highlighting her tall, well-proportioned, and powerful figure. Underneath the suit was a pure white silk shirt, buttoned up at the collar. Her long, straight legs were wrapped in straight-leg trousers and finished off with black pointed-toe Manolo Blahnik high heels, each step creating a light, steady tapping sound on the stone floor. Her thick black hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, not a single stray hair falling loose, further highlighting her angular jawline and proud high neck. Oversized, black-rimmed Tom Ford sunglasses hid almost half her face, even though the sun was almost down, adding an unfathomable layer of mystery. She carried no handbag, only the latest smartphone nestled in the palm of her hand. Victoria's demeanor exuded intense concentration, absolute self-control, and a professional cool that made others wary. But behind that calm, almost emotionless exterior, Agent Victoria Adams's mind, a senior analyst for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, specializing in international counterterrorism and foreign intelligence, was racing at breakneck speed. She had just left a highly charged, highly classified briefing at a secure location in an anonymous office building nearby. The meeting had lasted more than 3 hours, discussing a potential terrorist threat against U.S. interests abroad. Her mind was still reeling from fragmented intelligence, complex analysis, risk scenarios, and countermeasures. Instead of calling a cab, she decided to walk the short distance back to the luxurious hotel where she was staying undercover. Walking helps her relieve stress, and it's also a way for her to practice a deeply ingrained professional habit, observing her surroundings, identifying unusual signs, assessing potential threats. It's the survival instinct of a spy operating in a dangerous world. She was aware of the few glances of curiosity or admiration that the few remaining passers-by gave her, perhaps because of her immaculate attire, her unusual demeanor, or simply because she was a beautiful black woman walking confidently alone on this prestigious street at dusk. But she paid little attention to them. Her attention was focused on more important details: the white van that had been parked on the opposite corner for too long, the man in a hooded sweatshirt leaning against the wall in front of her, or some unusual sound coming from the nearest alley. Then her attention was drawn to an old Chicago Police Department patrol car that was driving very slowly in the sidewalk lane, seemingly deliberately moving parallel to her. The familiar blue and white Ford Crown Victoria looked to have seen years of use. The paint had a few scratches. One taillight was slightly cracked. Inside the car were two white police officers. The driver, Officer Ray Donovan, was in his 50s, his face red, deeply lined with frowns and tired, dissatisfied. His eyes were narrowed as he stared at Victoria through the window. In the passenger seat was Officer Jimmy Flynn, a much younger man, probably not yet 30, with short blonde hair, a somewhat boyish face, but with an arrogant, smug expression. Donovan nudged Flynn, his voice full of annoyance and prejudice. "Look at that girl, Jimmy. You see? A black girl in a black suit and high heels. Looks like she just came back from a lover's funeral. And that face is so arrogant. She walks like a queen." Flynn chuckled, his eyes also scanning Victoria with a mixture of curiosity and rudeness. "I agree, boss. She's quite the looker. Nice figure, cold face. Must be the type to be difficult to please." He made a rude comment about her appearance. "I don't know if she's hard to please or not," Donovan muttered, "but the kind of black girls who dress like that in this neighborhood are definitely not honest people. Either they're nasty lawyers who argue too hard, or they're in shady jobs with dirty money in their pockets. And the streets are deserted now. It's the end of their shift, and they're fucking sleepy. Why don't we stop and check in on this girl for fun, see what she's up to?" The evil idea began to form in the mind of the tired, prejudiced old cop. Flynn, with his playful nature and wanting to show off in front of his seniors, immediately responded. "Sounds good to me, boss. I'm bored too. Let's see if this queen has anything interesting." Donovan smirked, a disarming smile. He turned on his signal, slowly pulling the old patrol car to the side of the road, right in front of Victoria's path, blocking her path deliberately. The car doors swung open. Donovan and Flynn stepped out, swaggering, overconfident, as if they owned the street. The crude and prejudiced harassment was about to begin. Victoria Adams, though she didn't know their true intentions, instinctively knew that trouble was coming. Officer Ray Donovan and Officer Jimmy Flynn deliberately stood in Victoria's path on the sidewalk. Donovan, with a scowl and a slightly bulging beer belly under his uniform, moved closer to Victoria, his hands on his hips, a pose that was intended to project power and intimidation. Flynn leaned against the side of the car, arms crossed over his chest, a knowing smirk on his face, his eyes scanning Victoria from head to toe with undisguised scrutiny. "Good evening, pretty girl," Donovan boomed, his tone deliberately teasing and somewhat casual, completely unbecoming of an off-duty cop. "Where are you off to at this hour? Getting off work late? Or on your way to the night shift?" He emphasized the word work, looking at her with a lewd insinuation. Victoria stopped, standing tall and facing the two officers. She slowly removed her Tom Ford sunglasses, revealing sharp, cold, expressionless eyes. Her gaze was fixed on Donovan, unflinching or fearful, a direct, assessing gaze that made the older officer feel a little uncomfortable. "Can I help you, officers?" Her voice was even, calm, professional, but there was a coldness and an implicit warning underneath. Flynn, seeing that his senior seemed to be overwhelmed by Victoria's coldness, quickly interjected, trying to break the atmosphere with more vulgar jokes. "Wow, you're so cold. This black suit is really nice. It looks so powerful. Where did you buy it? Or was it a commemorative gift from some rich guy?" He laughed loudly, deliberately using demeaning words, implying that she was a kept woman. Victoria ignored Flynn's rude words. She turned her gaze to Donovan, who seemed to be her superior or the mastermind. "I'm on my way back to the hotel. I'm not breaking any laws. You're blocking my way without cause. Please give me a good reason for this." or get out of my way." Her voice remained calm, but now had a sharp edge and impatience. She didn't have time to argue with these abusers. Victoria's disregard for Flynn and her fearless, even commanding attitude toward Donovan really angered both officers. They were not used to being treated this way by a woman, especially a black woman. Their hurt pride, combined with their prejudice and bullying nature, made Donovan decide to teach the girl a lesson. "Oh, and now you're telling us to get out of the way," Donovan growled, his expression growing more ferocious. "Who do you think you are, talking to the police like that? You look suspicious, dressed fancy, walking alone in this area at this hour. Who knows what you're hiding? Maybe you've just made some illegal transaction?" He began to make up excuses. "We have the right to search you. Show us your bag." He held out his hand, making an unreasonable demand. "I don't have a bag," Victoria said curtly, "and you have no right to search me without a warrant or probable cause. You're harassing me." She looked Donovan straight in the eye, not backing down. "I demand to know both of your badge numbers." Asking for a badge number is a perfectly legitimate action for a citizen to take when interacting with the police, but for Donovan and Flynn, who were accustomed to abusing power and disregarding procedure, it was an unacceptable challenge. It showed that this girl was not to be trifled with and could cause them trouble later. "What? You want my badge number?" Donovan roared, his face red with anger. "You think you're a lawyer or a journalist, opposing a police officer on duty? You want to go to jail, don't you?" He turned to Flynn, who was also stunned by Victoria's firmness. "This guy is clearly a problem, Jimmy. No more talking. Arrest him now, for obstruction of justice and suspicion of criminal activity." Flynn, although a little hesitant before Victoria's decisiveness, but Donovan's order was irresistible. Moreover, the arrogance and desire to show off of youth made him feel agitated. "Okay, boss," he replied, then quickly pulled the handcuffs from his belt, walking towards Victoria with a fierce expression. Victoria stood still, her arms hanging limply at her sides. She could have easily taken out both cops in seconds with her rigorous CIA training, but she knew that doing so would have far more serious consequences, possibly exposing her identity and compromising her top-secret mission. She needed to stay calm, follow procedure, even if it was a flawed procedure, and find a more intelligent way to handle the situation. She let Flynn close in and forcefully twist her arms behind her back. Clack! The cold metal clicked as the handcuffs tightened around her wrists. Pain and humiliation surged through Victoria, handcuffed like a criminal on the streets of Chicago by two corrupt cops simply because of the color of her skin and her uniform. She took a deep breath, swallowing down the anger and resentment that was boiling up inside her. "See? Who told you to be so stubborn?" Donovan stepped closer, looking at the handcuffed Victoria with a look of satisfaction and triumph. He felt that he had completely controlled the situation, had subdued this stubborn girl. "Now get in the car and go back to the station to talk, my dear. There's plenty of time to talk," he sneered, his eyes glancing at her expensive suit with longing. Flynn opened the back door of the squad car, motioning for Victoria to get in. She did so silently, her back straight and her eyes cold, betraying no other emotion. The police car started, merging into the sparse traffic of Chicago's twilight streets. But instead of heading straight for the nearest police station, Donovan turned onto darker, more deserted side streets. The second act, the Blackmail act, was about to begin. Victoria knew it, and she was ready for her next role. In the darkness of the back seat of the police car, Victoria Adams's cold eyes flashed with an unfathomable light. These two had no idea who they had just arrested, and they had no idea what price they were about to pay for their stupidity and cruelty. Donovan drove through the deserted old industrial neighborhoods of the city's south side, where dim streetlights and patchy brick walls gave the scene a somewhat gloomy and ominous feel. Flynn sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing down at Victoria in the back seat with a curious, mocking gaze. Finally, Donovan pulled the car to a stop on a dark corner under an old overpass where there was almost no traffic. He turned off the headlights, but left the engine running. Then he turned around, looked at Victoria through the metal mesh that separated the front and back seats, and his tone became artificially intimate. "Look, pretty girl," he began, his voice low. "We don't really want to make things difficult for you. You seem like a reasonable person, and you don't want to get caught up in the mess at the police station, do you?" Victoria was silent, her cold eyes fixed on Donovan through the dim darkness. "Look," Donovan continued, seeing that she didn't react. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, and you're being defiant. Not to mention the suspicions about your background and shady business. If we follow proper procedure, you'll be detained for at least the night, booked, questioned, and possibly even drug tested. If this gets into the papers, it's over, especially for someone as important as you." He emphasized the important sarcastically. "So what do you want?" Victoria asked bluntly, her voice even and fearless. Donovan smirked, revealing teeth yellowed by tobacco. "Smart. Wouldn't it be better to know that?" He rubbed his hands together. "It's simple. We can be humane, flexible, forget about this arrest, pretend we never met. You'll be released right here, free to go back to your hotel. In return," he paused, looking deep into Victoria's eyes, "you just need to show a little goodwill, a little gratitude for our brother's help." "How much?" Victoria asked curtly. Donovan winked at Flynn and they both chuckled. "Not much considering what you have," Donovan said. $3,000, cash, right now. Once paid, the handcuffs will be released and you can go. Think of it as buying your peace and your clean record. A bargain, right?" Flynn sat beside her, nodding, his hand on his gun holster as if in a silent threat. They were completely confident that, under the pressure of being captured and threatened, and in a deserted place like this girl would definitely, obediently hand over the money. Faced with a blatant blackmail offer and handcuffed in the back seat of a police car on a dark, deserted street corner, Agent Victoria Adams remained eerily calm. Anger and contempt for these two degenerates boiled inside her, but on the outside, she maintained a cold, unreadable expression. She had enough evidence of their crimes: harassment, false imprisonment, abuse of power, and now blackmail. It was time to end this act and call in backup. She let out a small sigh, a gesture calculated to appear submissive. $3,000. She repeated the number, her voice sounding hesitant. I don't have that much cash on me." It was a lie, but a necessary one to get to the next step. "I need to make a phone call." "Call?" Donovan narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Call who? A teammate to come rescue?" "No," Victoria replied quickly, trying to sound sincere. "I called my assistant. She manages my personal finances. I'll tell her to transfer the money or bring the cash to a certain location." She deliberately offered a solution that seemed reasonable and safe for them, avoiding the need to go to an ATM or a crowded place. Donovan and Flynn looked at each other, considering. The idea of taking the wire transfer seemed a little risky, given the potential for leaving a trail, but having the girl call someone with cash seemed more feasible. They still felt they had the situation under control. "Okay," Donovan said after a moment. "Call, but put it on speaker, and be nice about it. Don't do anything." He handed Victoria back her new iPhone, which he had confiscated earlier. Victoria took the phone back, her hands now cuffed in front of her. It was a little awkward, but she quickly unlocked the screen with facial recognition and went through her contacts. She didn't look for her assistant. Instead, she selected a number saved under a completely normal name, but it was actually a top-level encrypted hotline that connected directly to the CIA's Emergency Command Center in Langley, Virginia. She pressed call, and as Donovan had requested, she put the phone on speaker. The other end connected almost immediately, but there was no ring or answering voice, just the silence typical of a secure line. Victoria took a deep breath, then spoke, her voice calm but with an urgency and authority that Donovan and Flynn couldn't detect. She used code phrases and pre-established technical terms. "This is Eagle 1. Status report Sierra November. Identity verification required Alpha Gamma 57. She read a string of identifying characters. Current location, grid coordinates 34 Delta, South Halstead Overpass area. Target illegally restrained by local law enforcement. Call sign CPD 7214. Request immediate deployment of Special Rescue Procedure Kilo Zulu. Emphasis, Priority Level 1. Confirmation, Kilo Zulu." After saying that, she quickly hung up the call. The whole process took less than 30 seconds. Donovan and Flynn sat in the front seat, gaping. They didn't understand a word of what Victoria was saying. "Eagle 1? Sierra November? Kilo Zulu? What the hell are you talking about?" Flynn snapped, feeling annoyed and vaguely uneasy. "Who are you calling? The gang?" "I told you not to play around," Donovan snapped, starting to sense something was wrong. The overly professional tone, the strange terminology. It didn't sound like he was calling an assistant at all. But before they could question him further or take any further action, a series of sudden and terrifying events occurred at breakneck speed. Less than 3 minutes after Victoria's call, the walkie-talkie mounted on the dashboard of the patrol car suddenly started ringing continuously. It was not a normal call from the operator, but an emergency signal. The voice on the other end of the line was urgent, panicked, almost shouting, "Vehicle 7214! Answer. Urgent order from the commander. Stop all action. Hold your position. Absolutely do not harm the female subject in the vehicle. Repeat, absolutely do not harm the subject. Federal forces are on the way. Answer! Exclamation mark." Donovan and Flynn froze. Feds? Female subject in the car? What the hell was going on? And then, as if to confirm their extreme fear, from both ends of the dark road under the overpass, extremely powerful headlights suddenly turned on, shining directly at the patrol car. 2 black sedans without license plates, looking completely normal but moving with terrifying speed and precision, rushed from 2 directions, quickly locking the front and rear of the police car, leaving no way out. The doors of the 2 sedans opened almost simultaneously. 4 men dressed in elegant black suits, but exuding a cold, deadly aura, quickly stepped out. They were not wearing uniforms, nor were they wearing any visible badges. But the way they moved, the way they held their weapons, and the sharpness in their eyes made it clear that they were not ordinary police officers. They were men from a much more secretive and powerful agency. One of the men in suits, who appeared to be in command, walked up to Donovan's side of the car and rapped hard on the window. "Chicago Police! Open the door! Federal government orders!" His voice was deep and steely, brooking no resistance. He held up a dark blue dog tag with the golden eagle seal of the Central Intelligence Agency. Donovan and Flynn saw the card and felt their hearts stop. CIA. Why was CIA here? What did it have to do with this black girl? Their minds were completely blank, unable to understand what was going on. The CIA team leader gave a signal. Another quickly opened the back door of the police car. The leader looked inside, his eyes landing on Victoria, sitting calmly in the back seat. A flash of concern crossed his cool face. "Agent Adams, are you safe?" he asked, his voice filled with respect. "I'm fine, Director Thorne," Victoria replied, her voice even. She recognized her immediate superior, Section Chief Robert Thorne, who was supposed to be in Langley. His presence here indicated the seriousness of the situation. Thorne nodded, then turned to Donovan and Flynn, who were standing stock still beside the car, their faces drained of color. His eyes were icy cold. "You are Officer Donovan and Officer Flynn?" "Yes. Yes, sir," Donovan stammered, his voice trembling. "I request that you release Agent Adams's handcuffs immediately," Thorne ordered, his voice devoid of any emotion. Flynn shakily pulled out his keys and fumbled with Victoria's handcuffs. When the handcuffs were removed, Victoria slowly stood up and stepped out of the police car. She rubbed her red wrists and calmly adjusted her black vest. She stood there, under the headlights of the police cars, facing Donovan and Flynn, the two men who had just taunted, arrested, and tried to blackmail her. She didn't need to say anything more. Her cold, powerful gaze, along with the overwhelming presence of the CIA agents and Director Thorne, said it all. Donovan and Flynn finally understood. They hadn't just messed with a normal woman. They had foolishly crossed paths with a high-ranking agent of the CIA, one of the most powerful intelligence organizations in the world. They had made a mistake that was not only career-threatening, but could have consequences they never imagined. Their world had just come crashing down, right under that dark overpass. The sudden and powerful appearance of CIA agents and Section Chief Robert Thorne brought an end to the abuse of power and extortion by Officer Ray Donovan and Officer Jimmy Flynn. The two Chicago police officers stood frozen at the scene under the bright headlights of the black sedans, their faces changing from white to gray, their bodies shaking with shock and extreme fear. They could not utter a word. They could only stare at Agent Victoria Adams, the woman they had despised and treated so badly, now standing there, surrounded by the absolute protection and respect of the people of the nation's top intelligence agency. Soon after, Sergeant Maria Hernandez, Donovan and Flynn's immediate supervisor, was also on the scene with a command vehicle. She was a serious Hispanic female officer with a reputation for fairness. When she saw the scene before her, two officers surrounded by federal agents, and a woman in a black suit who seemed to have an unusual amount of authority, she immediately knew something was terribly wrong. After a brief, tense exchange with Section Chief Thorne, who presumably revealed just enough information to confirm the federal authority and sensitivity of the case without revealing the CIA's identity, Sergeant Hernandez did not hesitate to carry out her duties. "Officer Donovan! Officer Flynn!" Sergeant Hernandez's voice rang out sharply, cutting through the wind under the bridge. "Based on the initial charges and the request of the federal agency, you are hereby suspended indefinitely, effective immediately. Turn in your weapons, badges, radios, and badges now." She allowed no explanation or justification. Donovan and Flynn, like two people who had lost their minds, silently followed orders. With trembling hands, they removed their guns, their shiny badges, and the other items that had symbolized the power they had abused. They were stripped of everything on the spot, in front of federal agents and their commanders. It was a humiliating humiliation, a bitter end to their police careers. A parallel criminal and internal investigation was then promptly launched. Because of the sensitive nature of the investigation involving a high-ranking CIA operative and intelligence operations, the investigation could be handled more discreetly than would be typical. The CIA Office of the Inspector General was able to coordinate with the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office to ensure that the case was handled with integrity while protecting national security and Agent Adams' identity. Victoria Adams's official testimony was the key piece of evidence. Along with the data collected from the scene, GPS data, radio logs, and possibly statements from Sergeant Hernandez and CIA agents present. Although there was no live audio-video recording from Victoria, the chain of events and circumstantial evidence were more than enough to establish guilt for Donovan and Flynn. They were charged with felony counts of unlawful detention under color of law, conspiracy to extort, abuse of authority, and federal civil rights violations. Race and gender discrimination were identified as the primary motivations for the harassment and initial arrest. Faced with overwhelming evidence and charges and pressure from both the federal and local police departments, Donovan and Flynn had little choice but to accept a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial and potentially harsher sentences. The end result, after all the legal procedures required, was a 6-year prison sentence for each, a harsh punishment, commensurate with the seriousness of the crime, especially when the victim was a federal agent on duty. Naturally, both were permanently fired from the Chicago police force, losing their pensions, benefits, and any chance of ever working again in law enforcement. They paid a terrible price for their stupidity, prejudice, and abuse of power, even if they may never fully know the true identity and role of the woman in the black suit they encountered that fateful afternoon. Days later, Agent Victoria Adams is out of Chicago, continuing her top-secret mission somewhere in the world. The incident with the 2 rogue cops is just a small wave, an unexpected incident in the dangerous and complicated flow of her work. But it also leaves her with an unpleasant aftertaste, a reminder of the dark underbelly that persists in society, of the dangerous intersection of discrimination, racial, gender, and corrupting power. She was protected. Justice was served for her personally, thanks to her position and the timely intervention of the agency. But she couldn't help but think of how many others, who do not have the same protection, who still face harassment, abuse, and injustice every day from the very people who are supposed to protect them just because of the color of their skin, their gender, or their circumstances. Victoria's job requires her to be cool, rational, and sometimes make tough decisions in life-threatening situations to protect national security. But deep inside, she is still a human being with emotions and concerns about social justice. The incident in Chicago, although just a small downfall in her career, has further strengthened her quiet determination to fight against evil and injustice, not only on the international intelligence front, but also in the fight for respect and equality for all. Sitting on the agency's private jet, looking down at the white clouds drifting lazily below, Victoria Adams's eyes were distant but determined. The black suit may be just a part of the job, but her iron will and determination to protect justice are always present. The fight is still on, and she will always be ready to face it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.